If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what cryptid, otherworldly things or unidentified creatures have you ever encountered that made you believe in them? When I was around 14 years old, my brother was messing around with dark magic, and our house became active with paranormal incidents. The scariest thing for me was that while getting dressed for school one morning, I started moving really fast, and when I tried to control it, I started to go really slowly. I caught a glimpse of myself in the vanity mirror, and my reflection was smiling a wicked little smirk. It didn't look like me, it looked like someone inside my bodysuit looking back at me. From a small town, pretty suburban, but lots of wooded areas and open fields. Driving home late at night on a back road, surrounded by trees, I see what I think to be the ass end of a deer crossing the road, so I immediately slow down. Because I slowed and was on alert, I was able to get a better glance at what I thought was a deer. Head and antlers like a buck, but it was standing on two legs as it moved. It was very tall, probably taller than my F-150. It seemed to be moving its upper body in a similar manner to that of a human, moving quickly. Now, deer are large and have been known to stand on their hind legs. So, it can probably be explained away, but it just never sat right with me. This happened to me years ago. I was a teenager dating my now wife. I was taking my girlfriend home for the night, very late. 2 a.m., a couple minutes from my house, a massive white dog dashes in front of my car. The biggest dog I've ever seen, located in WV. Around 10 minutes later, I get to her home. Her grandma was sitting outside on the swing. She told my wife to go inside and told me to go straight home. As I was leaving their windy mountain driveway, the dog bounded in front of my car again and into the night. This happened around 15 minutes from my home this time. I hurried home, shaken. And I basically ran to my house. Later, her grandmother, an ex-Pentecostal preacher, told her that a critter had followed us up the driveway. She uses that word to describe what I would call lesser demonic creatures, annoyances, bad luck, etc. I live in Washington and used to live in a place that was surrounded by forest for months. Each time I went out to smoke at the edge of the woods, some type of creature would throw rocks at me from behind the trees in the dark. I told my friend about this because it happened so many times, so one time he came with me to where I smoke, and when it happened, the creature was throwing rocks at me. My friend immediately ran into the woods. My friend came out of the woods a short time later and said that there was nothing there, but we both saw the rock being thrown at me. So this thing moved fast and quietly. I would get a sinking feeling in my stomach, and my dog would always whine when I sat out there. This happened every single night. I went out at night to take a walk, sit at the edge of the forest, and smoke. Could this be Bigfoot or some other creature? Has anyone had any similar experiences with this? I'd also like to mention that this is near native grounds. The rocks were not small but not huge, I'd say a bit bigger than a tennis ball. Was this creature trying to scare me off, or was it trying to communicate something to me since it happened every single night? A friend of mine in Brazil has seen a strange creature we are yet to identify. They saw it out of their kitchen window, it was climbing their wall, getting out of the house's perimeter, and was only seen for a few seconds. My friend described it as slim, with an almost humanoid shape and white skin, or thin fur. It was as big as an adult person. They live in a pretty small city and recently moved from their old house near the town's graveyard. There are various reports from the townsfolk of a similar creature that tries to climb over the cemetery's walls only to fall back inside again. My friend also claims to have seen it once. We have done extensive research, and there aren't any similar or big enough animals in the area that could be what we saw. I live 25 minutes south of Boston. About 6 months ago, I saw this insane thing. It was about 3 a.m., I had been up late as I normally am. I stepped out to smoke a cigarette. It was dark as hell, except for the stars and moon. As I was smoking, I heard this noise of something flying. I look up and see this winged creature land on my neighbor's roof, and I just sit there like a gargoyle would. I thought I was seeing SHT or something wrong, but then the creature jumped up and flew away, and I could see its whole body. It was the size of a small human, but it had massive wings. It reminded me of a gargoyle. I don't know what the duck I saw, but it was crazy. About 2 years ago, during late July or early August, my friend, E, and I were walking along the beach, about 10 kilometers away from where we both lived at the time. We live in a quite temperate climate, so not too far off from the beach is a dense forest that stretches along most of the coast. Since it was around 3 p.m. and the sun was at its peak, it was getting pretty hot outside, and E told me she wanted to walk closer to the forest to walk in the shade for a bit. I told her I didn't want to because there's usually a lot of black widow nests between the beach and forest, and suggested that instead we walk closer to the water. Told me she didn't want to walk near the water because she was wearing shoes and didn't want to get them wet since she would have to drive us home later. Eventually she got me to go walk near the forest with her, and about 15 minutes into it, I started getting this really weird feeling. It's hard to explain, but it just felt like something was off. I noticed was fidgety, and she asked me if I felt like we were being followed or if it was just her. I then started looking around us, and when I looked towards the forest, I saw what I thought was the silhouette of a person slightly hunched over behind a tree deeper into the foliage. As I looked closer, I saw it had these long claw-like fingers and multiple fluffy, or maybe spiky, black tails all swishing around. It was at this point that I and started freaking out. This thing then turned its head to look in our direction and stated that it was slowly walking or limping towards us. As it walked, it looked like it was flickering in and out of existence, almost. As it was disappearing, my friend and I ran the hell out of there and went back to her car. A few minutes later, we convinced ourselves we were just seeing things and worked up the nerve to go back to where we saw it, but it was gone. A few years back, I went to an outdoor electronic music festival and was riding a natural high with no drugs other than a bit of pot. The first night, at around midnight, the party is starting to amp up. I'm really into the music and am connecting with the DJ like there's no tomorrow. We're making almost constant eye contact, and it's obvious he's aware of how deeply I'm appreciating the music, and as the set goes on, we're connecting more and more. I know he can tell that I'm fully involved and giving my all to everything around me. Finally, he motioned with his hand for me to turn around. I whip my head around to look behind me for 1 second, and when I turn it back, my jaw is dropped, and I'm absolutely stunned. For the second time I looked back, I saw several brilliantly blue, humanoid, glowing beings walking intensely and purposefully through the forest. I just stood there in stupefied amazement, staring at the DJ with my mouth hanging open as he looked back at me, slowly and knowingly nodding his head. They look like humans, without the hair, but glow with brilliant blue, almost white light, and you can see through them. I told one of my friends about the experience, and he said that they are called the Devas and that he has another friend who has seen them too. I saw weird things while I was living at my grandparents' house. And when I say weird things, I mean seeing little, big-eyed humanoid things. The only reason I had to move in with my grandparents in the first place was because I counted on the wrong person to move in with after my lease was up on my old house. Needless to say, I was in desperate need to live somewhere, and my grandparents offered me a spare room. I always used to stay in their house on weekends or whenever I wanted when I was a kid, and I know that house better than my mom's house. I have slept over there countless times and never seen any of the crazy stuff I've seen since I moved in there. I have heard the stories of a man in black that would run through the house, but these things I've seen are nothing like the descriptions of the man in black. They would only ever show up when no one was around, which made me think I was crazy at first. They stand about 3.5 feet tall, and for some reason, when I get a good enough look at them, they look like emaciated children. They're completely bald, and if I actually get a look at their faces, they have bulbous eyes, and they are either black or reddish in color. The skin color is this sallow or. Usually, I never see them in good lighting. I would always see them peeking out from around corners or trying to sprint past a doorway. Seeing them in the first place is bad enough, and then I had to start thinking about why they could possibly be there. I once told my friend and coworker about them, and she grew paler than usual and had to stop what she was doing. She said, "It's weird you saw that, because my dad saw something like them once." Then she told me of the day her dad's father died of cancer in their house. Her dad didn't want to leave his side but eventually went down the hall to his room to sleep. He had a dream that he stood in the doorway to his father's room and watched as little doorways in the walls opened up and little people with black eyes came out. They surrounded the bed his father was in, and it looked like they were making preparations. Then he said a spiral staircase dropped from the ceiling, and down it walked a tall figure draped in black with a white face. It came to his father, picked him up, and walked back up the steps with his father in its arms. The stairway disappeared, and the little people went back through their doors, and they closed like nothing was there. My friend's dad woke up and ran down the hall to his father's room, but it was too late. He had already died. I was totally blown away by this story, and then my friend asked me, "Jen, do you think that when you see these things, they're not so much looking around a corner as coming through the wall to look at you?" I still don't know what to think. So this happened to me around 6 to 7 years ago, and I didn't think much of it until now. So I don't know if this is oh so serious, but it is quite interesting to me as 6 to 7 years ago, each time I went to bed or fell asleep, I would have a regular normal dream just like anybody would, but always every dream would have these long, tall shadowy figures with either red or white glowing eyes, and they would come out when I least expected it. Like one time, I had a normal dream. I was at school with my friends, then all of a sudden my surroundings turned dark and foggy, and these long, tall shadowy figures would start climbing out of lockers, and they would start sprinting towards us and screaming sometimes, which is when my brain decided to wake me up. No matter what dream I have, those same exact figures will somehow intrude and wake me up. They kept coming into my dreams for around a year or so until they stopped, and I stopped dreaming frequently. I do recall encountering some while I was awake. One would be staring at me through a window with glowing red eyes, and I didn't really do anything about it. So last night I was chasing off one of the feral cats that tried to start fights with my sweet kitty and steal her food. Every time I chase it off at night, I grab my flashlight so I can look around the backyard. Well, while I was doing this, something flew at me, and I hit it pretty hard with a flashlight, and it's no small flashlight. After I hit it, I felt some kind of liquid, which I assumed was blood, spray onto my face and shirt. It also let out a noise that I still can't entirely comprehend. I went inside after I hit it and saw my dad was up, so I told him about it and asked if there was any liquid on me. There was not. We then went outside to look for it, and there was no evidence of it. My flashlight was no longer cracked, there was no blood around and no teeth knocked out. The only evidence I have is that I still feel pain in my right hand, which I'm hoping isn't cracked. We tried to go back inside, but the door I had just come through to get inside was now locked, so we banged on the door until my mom woke up and opened it. I told her about it, then smoked a cigarette to calm down. Now this creature I hit was about as big as a person. It had the face of a person but was different somehow, and it showed no emotion. You know how in games, movies, or shows a monster has an evil look on its face? I didn't see wings, I don't think, but I only saw it for half a second when I hit it. When I was younger, a few friends and I spent the night alone at their house here in Conroe, Texas. Their house was about a mile or two away from the San Jacinto River. While we were there, we realized that we didn't buy any food for dinner, but it was no big deal because one of them knew how to hunt. So we go out into the woods to catch something, each one of us holding a weapon of some sort, and we come across a creature hunkered over in the woods. At first thought, I'm like, boar. So we got ready to kill it. I was kind of freaked out already, and then suddenly it opened its eyes, glowing red, and stood up on its back legs. The thing must have been at least 8 feet tall and had very thin, very long limbs. We couldn't see much of the thing in the shadows, but I saw that his body was not symmetrical. Just like random protrusions here and there from its skin. Anyway, we freak out, and we run away. I think even now, 5 years later, I might have done the same. As we are running, we come across this vast open field that is covered with some kind of nest all over the place. We were unsure what it was, but then hundreds of those red eyes appeared in a circle all around the field, just behind the tree line. Something I still don't understand is that they never attacked, they just made noises and looked at us curiously. Anyway, we freaked out and turned to run back, and they started shrieking. Like, blood-curdling, crazy loud shrieking. We even had to cover our ears at one point. Picture the Nazgul shriek from Lord of the Rings, that was what it felt like. So we run away, the shrieking still going on in the distance, and as we run, we can see a couple of the eyes slowly moving towards us, but just watching. Not threatening. That didn't matter, I was terrified. I kept running. We get out of the woods, we're a little ways from their house, but nearby is a street light, right next to the wood edge. And one came out into the light. Solid black with a little gray here and there, it looked like it had an exoskeletal structure on top of its bones and no distinguishable face. Just a large mouth and those glowing eyes. It looked at us, shrieked, dropped back to all fours, and squashed back into the woods. Now, 14-year-old me blew this off as my imagination or adrenaline or something, but just last week I found out that, about 2 or 3 miles upstream, right behind the neighborhood that my fiancé lives in, there is a witching ground known to the locals as a meeting place for witches and even a sacrificial ground. They call it the Devil's Playground, but there is literally no information on it online. Like one article talks about the place and the creatures, and a few people commented, saying they've seen it too, but there's still like no info on it. Skin creature? I'm not sure how to properly explain this, but a few years ago, I was on a walk with my boyfriend around 10:30 p.m. when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this odd creature. It was about 5 feet tall, but hunched over. It looked like an old-fashioned werewolf, with claws and teeth but no fur, just skin. And it was, no joke, galloping in between houses beside us. I turned to get a better look, and as soon as I turned, it was gone. About a year later, my dad was telling a story about a creature he saw crossing the road when he was driving, and he described the same creature. I live in the northeastern United States. Has anyone else seen anything like this? This happened to a friend of mine a few years ago. My friend and I are both gun enthusiasts, and I had just purchased a new gun and wanted to shoot it. I live at the base of a mountain that borders the Blue Ridge Parkway. I own 17 acres, so shooting in my backyard isn't an issue. We began shooting my new gun, and my friend turns to his right and is immediately shocked and says, "Hey man, what that?" When I turned to look, I saw something that sticks with me to this day. It was a red-eyed creature, maybe 2 feet high, with glowing red eyes. I did not get a very good vibe from it, and in my face, I was terrified. Even with a load gun in my hand. We approached the creature slowly, and my feeling of terror rose. My friend and I immediately turned around, went inside, and did not speak about this for the rest of the time. Like we had forgotten about what just happened. My friend called me the next day and asked me why we had not done anything, and we both came to the agreement that this creature had influenced me in some way. If anyone has had a similar experience, please share. As far as looks, numerous people have asked about the description. It was 2 to 3 feet tall, with scaly gray skin, but I was distracted by the eyes. They penetrated through me. It was so intense. I have lived in Wyoming all my life, and I have had numerous strange things happen to me over the course of my life, and these are some of the strangest. I was only around 7 years old at the time, and I was with my dad, my friend, and his dad as well. We had left to go hunting at 4 in the morning during elk season, and after 30 minutes of driving, we had made it into the wilderness. We were driving down a valley on an old dirt road at the slowest pace possible when my dad somehow slowed the car down even more, saying he heard something. Me and my friend were just messing in the back seat when I happened to look out his window, and I saw 2 human-looking eyes that glowed orange, and it was looking right through the window, but I didn't freak out, and I told my friend, and he saw it, but we slowly drove past it. I even have an old recording of me and my friend telling my mom what happened. Okay, so fast forward 3 years. I was camping with my family. I was messing around outside our camper when I saw a figure moving in the distance. It was tall, and I mean really tall. I thought it was my brother, so I called out his name and said, "Come back." The figure turned and stared at me for a couple seconds before walking off into the woods. I thought it was him being an asshole like always, so I retreated back to the camper, but when I walked back in, everyone was in the camper messing around. It was the end of January in 2019, and I had just finished my exam, so I was at home. My back door has a window, so you can see out the back to part of the neighbor's yard. My dog was looking out the back door window, and I sat down to cuddle her. So basically, at this point, I'm looking out the window into the neighbor's yard and petting my dog when all of a sudden I see this huge, long, black figure get down from the neighbor's gazebo roof. It all happened in about 2 seconds. The creature took up a little over 1/3 of the roof. I would say the creature was around 10 to 12 feet long. I saw a head. It was shaped like a goat or cow. It was super long and skinny. It looked like it moved on all fours. The figure also appeared to be a shadowy black, but I think it was shadowy because it moved so fast. Granted, there were people working on the neighbor's house roof, but they had gone on lunch break, and I don't think anyone else was home. It couldn't have been a black tarp either, as it moved against the wind, and the movement looked too fluid to be a tarp flying in the wind. I wasn't the only one who noticed it either. My dog started growling, but oddly, she didn't scratch at the door to go outside and see what it was. She just growled and backed away a little. I should mention that I'm located in southern Ontario, Canada, near the Great Lakes, so maybe that may help. This happened back between 2009 and 2011. The people in the story are myself, my ex-girlfriend, whom I will call Penny, and a friend, Kyle. These aren't their real names. I don't feel comfortable sharing them online. My mother asked us to pick up her cat from the vet around 4 or 5 p.m. one night. As it was winter in the northern Midwest, it was getting dark around this time, and it was already a bit of a drive to and back from the vet because my mother lived out in the country and the vet was in town. At any rate, we went and got the cat without issue, and after we were to drop it off, myself, Penny, and Kyle were going to go see a movie. We get back to my mother's house. The sun has already set for the most part, and it's quite cold. Kyle decided to help me carry the cat inside, while Penny kept the car running to keep the heater going. Kyle liked talking to my mother and wanted to see her before we headed back out to see the movie. Well, we're walking up to the house, and both Kyle and I stopped because we both got this weird feeling at the same time. We figured this out later when we were talking about it. The house is in front of us, and my mother's yard is behind us. It was a big farmhouse, so it had a sprawling front yard. We both stood still. We felt frozen to the spot by this weird feeling, and I looked first and saw something standing behind us in the yard, and then Kyle looked too. The thing had to have been well over 6 feet 3 inches because that's how tall Kyle is, and it was bigger than him. It had a hulking shape, with more mass on top than the bottom, like a hunchback, which kind of just tapered off into shadows, so I don't know if it had legs or what they might have looked like. The whole thing was pitch black, even in the dark. It had no eyes and no discernible features whatsoever as far as facial features go, but I could tell it was huge and very angry. There was just a feeling I was getting off of it that it was mad that we were there, and I could tell it was staring right at us. The only discernible features about it were that it had massive horns, like antlers, sticking up off its head, and the hunch in its back seemed to be lumpy and had a regular shape sticking out of it, but because it was so dark, I couldn't figure out what it was. Neither of us heard a sound from it, it just stood there and menaced us for what felt like minutes, but it can't have been that long. Kyle unfroze me on the spot, and the two of us darted into my mother's house and delivered her cat. We waited a bit, but after looking outside, we didn't see anything out there anymore, and after talking to my mother for a bit, we ran back outside, Penny put on the gas, and we got out of there. We never saw it again after that. So in about 2010, my then boyfriend lived in Sweden. I live in Canada. He came to visit me, and during one of the evenings, I woke up to something strange perched at the foot of the bed. It was a pale, thin humanoid figure. It was completely hairless, and the legs seemed to be bowed in some way. It seemed to walk on all fours, despite looking human. I couldn't see much of its face since it was looking away from me. It looked a lot like the creature from the fictional story The Rake. When I gasped, it hopped off the bed and into the darkness. My partner heard me and woke to ask me what was wrong. I didn't tell him to not alarm him while trying to rest. In 2012, he was visiting once more, and we were once again in bed, sleeping. I woke up to hear my boyfriend screaming like I've never heard before. I immediately turned on the light and shook him to try and snap him out of it, but he just screamed and then cried. After 30 or so minutes, he was finally calm enough to explain what happened. Apparently, he woke up to a pale, humanoid figure with a gaping mouth and black, sunken eyes basically on top of him. As he screamed, the figure slowly backed itself into the closet, staring at him and crawling on all fours. I felt sick. I never told him about what I saw a few years prior. There's no way he could have known and described what I saw perfectly like that. I have been seeing this strange creature for the last 4 years, and it seems to follow me. As far as I know, the creature has never tried harming me, but it has oftentimes made me feel unsafe and threatened. As the years have passed, I've begun paying less attention to it and just putting the feeling in the back of my mind. In January 2012, I bought a horse and began boarding it at a very old barn. It was a small, tight-knit, friendly barn community not far from my home. It's been around since the 1960s, surrounded by woods. There were 3 barns, the main arena was entirely surrounded by thick woods, and there were small trails in the woods behind the property. Fast forward to June 2012, I have 2 horses there now. I was there every single day without fail, from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. I fed the horses and cared for them. I rode one every night as well, mainly in the arena but sometimes in the barnyard. There were no field or arena lights, just the moon and stars. One evening, around 5 p.m., I was sitting on her, letting her stand, when she started snorting and backing up. I looked up and saw this white or gray creature crawling out of the woods towards us. It had a very small, round head, and its eyes were just pits. It had a very small mouth, there was not much detail there. Its arms were very long and thin, and its fingers were also like that. Its rib cage was very pronounced and defined, and its legs were long and lanky. Its movements were very jerky, not smooth and fluid. It slowly jerked out at us when my horse turned and bolted out of the arena. She's a dead broken, calm, well-mannered horse who never spooked before this. Stubborn old mare, but not spooky. She would not go back into the arena that night. I walked her around the barnyard, staying near the main barn, put her up, and ran out to peek into the arena, only to find nothing except some footprints where I saw the thing. Throughout the summer, I saw it peeking, almost dancing, around the gate that led into the woods where the trails were. One night, roughly a month later, at about 9 p.m., I was riding that horse again in a front pasture. The moon was full and bright, and I looked to my left to see the creature running full, spread by my side on the other side of the fence. I slowed my horse to a stop, and it took off around the corner and behind the side barn into the woods. I continued seeing it, mainly in the woods, but it was always around. In the summer of 2013, the barn shut down when the owner died. We moved the horses to a friend's place for the time being, and I didn't see them there. Late summer/fall 2013, I found a new barn. The woods are directly behind the barn and arena. This place had lights and was much newer. About a month later, when I was getting ready to leave, I heard something in the woods. I looked down the barn all into the woods and saw the creature running down the road into the woods. I saw it much less frequently for a while, until later in fall 2014, when I began seeing it in the back pasture woods. It darted in and out of the tree line. I saw a second one sitting in a neighbor's yard. It would sit in the same spot every day and watch me ride. I started taking pictures, which are very poor and crappy, and sent them to a friend who claimed he and some others had seen them. I kept seeing it occasionally, but from a much greater distance than at the first barn. I went with this barn owner to another farm to get some stuff when I saw a very large version of this creature run out from the woods, right behind a tree I was 10 feet from, while I was alone by the trailer. Last November, a house sat for the barn owners. I went out around 2 a.m. to fill water troughs and enjoy the full moon and cool night. I was sitting in the back pasture when 3 of the creatures began coming from the woods. One came up to the trees near the trough where I was, and the other 2 were walking along the tree line. The horses were silently munching their hay, pretty far from where the creatures were. I messaged the guy from earlier and told him what was going on. Since that incident, I haven't really seen them. Last summer, I did see one outside my house staring into the windows. A few weeks ago, one was outside my bedroom windows tapping and making a strange, faint shrieking sound. I had a strange encounter a while back that I was telling my coworker about, and they insisted I saw a rake. I've been doing some research since I had no idea what it was, and it looks very similar to what I saw. Anyway, I was driving home from work at 1:30 a.m. about 2 months ago and was heading down this typically busy side street, except since it was late, there wasn't a lot of traffic, just a Jeep in front of me. As I was driving around a bend in the road, I saw in my peripheral vision this figure to my right by the sidewalk standing between 2 small trees held up by wire supports. The creature was standing kind of behind them. At first, I thought it was just a big, slender dog, like a white greyhound or Great Dane, that escaped and seemed to be standing and barking at traffic by the sidewalk. I only noticed it as I began to pass it. But as I passed by, I quickly noticed it appeared to have a humanoid-shaped head with black eyes, a hunched posterior back, and a long, stretched mouth like it was screaming. I was going about 45 miles per hour when I passed, and it was dark out. I thought to myself, yo, what was that? So I slowed down quickly to look back, and in my mirror I saw the creature turn around and run towards a wood fence, but as it ran, I saw how tall and slender the creature was. It seemed pale with a kind of anorexic appearance. It moved strangely, and its leg joints were inverted and bent in the opposite direction. At that point, I was seriously creeped out. The Jeep in front of me also slowed down, so I could only assume they saw it too. We both kept driving because it was late and we couldn't stop in the middle of the road, but that situation really made my skin crawl. I kept checking my mirrors for the rest of the drive home and debating if I should have called a non-emergency line to have an officer check it out, but I told myself they would think I was an idiot. Now, every night when I take that road, I look around to see if I can spot it again. I really want to believe it was just a dog, but I can't stop thinking about how strangely it moved with its backwards knees. I haven't talked about this much except to my coworker because, quite frankly, it sounds ridiculous. I'm just wondering what I actually saw and if it's something I should even be talking about. Or should I continue to pretend I never saw anything and just move on with my life? This happened to me about 3 years ago, but it still freaks me out. I was lying down in bed about to go to sleep when, all of a sudden, I heard my name being screamed. Naturally, I jump up, and I see this little creature at the foot of my bed scurry off. It still scares the living SHT out of me. It was maybe 2 feet tall, maybe less because my mattress was on the ground. It was naked, and it had big, pointy ears. I had my LEDs on so I could clearly see it for a second before it ran off. Anyone have any idea what I saw? I was about to go to sleep, but I swear I was awake, and I can still hear the way it screamed my name. Okay, so this is one of my very first explicit experiences with the paranormal. It happened when I was in the 5th or 6th grade, so I was probably 11 or 12. It was nighttime, and I was letting my dog out to go to the bathroom one last time before I went to bed. We have a very big yard, and she was a black dog, so it was easy to lose track of her at night, so my mom had this spotlight we could use to keep tabs on her. When I let her outside, the motion light on the back of the house never came on, so the yard was pitch black. We live in a semi-rural area. I went back into the house for a few minutes and came back to the back door to get her. At first, I couldn't see her anywhere since it was so dark, but then I noticed a pair of eyes in front of the fence, and they were about her height and were sort of glowing from the light inside the house. I called out her name to get her to come inside, but she didn't move at all. Then the eyes started to rise upwards as if something were crouched down, and they decided to stand up. I realized that was most definitely not my dog. I could still see the glowing eyes, which were now probably 7 or 8 feet off the ground, but I could also make out the outline of whatever it was. It was sort of humanoid, standing on 2 legs and having long arms with really long fingers, but it was a lot taller than a person. It started to walk along the fence line, and I'll never forget the way it moved. It moved sort of slowly but very fluidly at the same time. That was the first time in my life I ever felt pure terror. I remember the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and my eyes started to water. I was so scared. I quickly reached down and picked up the spotlight my mom kept by the door and went to shine it on whatever it was, but when I clicked on the light, it was gone. I called for my dog, and she came running inside, but from the complete opposite side of the yard, around the corner of the house. I still live in the same house, and every single night when I go to let our dogs out, I think about what I saw. I've never seen it any other time, but the forest on the edge of our property has given me weird vibes my entire life. I have no idea what I saw, but it gave me such a different feeling from the times I've had encounters with more traditional ghostly activity. I've had other paranormal encounters at my house, but every occurrence has been very mild and nothing like what I encountered that night. This happened a few years ago, but the memory of the event is something that is still as clear as day. It scared me to no end. My dog and I were on a walk with my boyfriend and his dog. We frequented this area a lot on our walks, pretty much every day, but there was just something off about this instance from the get-go. Not a scared feeling or whatever, just something was off, though not enough to stop us from going. The first red flag was that my dog was absolutely not going down the usual path we took. He was pulling and yanking back with everything in his little body, no growling or hackles, just resistance to walking down. He could be a grumpy old man sometimes, but he'd never done that before. He was very obedient and followed me wherever I went, except this day. Boyfriend's dog was fine, she walked no problem, but she's kind of dumb, so yeah, I still love her, though. It was getting dark as the sun was setting and drawing in, so we decided we'd head back and let my dog have his way without thinking too much about it. We just laughed at him. We were walking along the border, it's hard to explain, but basically it's a hill with bushes and small trees on it with a path running down the side. All we had to do was walk to the crossing, and we were almost home. The dogs are getting agitated and pulling towards the road away from the woods, and we are struggling to get them to walk on the path in front of us. My boyfriend's dog is yelping, she's husky, so you know the noise. I glance at the bushes, and what I see is the thing of nightmares. It was a big, black, dog-shaped thing. It had a hunched back and looked to be about 6 feet tall in the position it was in. Its body wasn't totally hidden by the bushes, and we could see it was kneeling down with its long legs in the air behind it. Its arms looked like they were in a push-up position, if that makes sense. Its eyes were piercing red, they were like headlights as it turned to look at us. I looked at my boyfriend, and the panic in his voice as he said run is something I'd never want to hear from a grown man again. We ran in the opposite direction and took the long way home. We didn't really talk about it that night, I don't think either of us seriously believed our eyes. I remember going to bed early that night and hugging my dog tighter than I ever had before. I didn't sleep much, but I remember having such a vivid dream of that thing chasing us. It is a reoccurring dream I've had a few times now, and what prompted this was that I had it earlier in the week. We talked about it the next morning, and he recounted every damn thing that I'd seen in that thing. I literally wouldn't have believed it if I had been alone. I'd have thought I was seeing things, and for that, I can't decide if it was a blessing or a curse that my boyfriend was there to witness it too. Which is why I wouldn't blame anyone if they don't believe this, because, hell, I probably wouldn't either if someone else told me this. I actually haven't shared this with anyone in real life. But I've never, ever been back to this day. So, last year, me, my dad, and my older sister were all staying at my aunt's house for the night. This starts with my sister. She was out on the porch smoking and saw some guy, in her words, walk through the light of the upstairs window, shining down on the driveway. She freaked out and ran inside and told me and my dad. We went outside to investigate, and we saw something. It was way too tall to be human, about 8 to 9 feet at least. So we scurried back inside and locked the door. My sister kept saying she thought that he was watching us through a window in the living room in which we were staying. So the next morning we looked out the window, and sure enough, there were footprints in the snow right in front of the window. We were basically shitting ourselves at this point. We told my aunt about what we had witnessed the night before, and she told us that she had seen that as well. And everyone else has been in the house at least once. I think we witnessed some kind of, best way of putting it, slender man. For those of you who are skeptical about this actually being paranormal, my aunt's closet neighbor is about 2 miles down the road, more like a trail, from her house. So it couldn't have been a person skulking around. When I was in high school, me and 4 other friends were hanging out, and we decided to go to a park area near a lake. So we park in the parking lot and start heading down the path that leads to this gazebo-covered picnic area with about 6 picnic tables under it. It's around 8 to 9 o'clock during the summer, so the sun is setting and it's starting to get dark. My friends and I are being loud and joking with each other and not really paying attention to everything around us, but I notice that there are 2 guys under the gazebo. So I turn, and I'm like, guys, there are people over there. So we look at them for a second, and there is one guy who has his arms crossed and is leaning up against one of the gazebo posts, and the other is sitting at one of the picnic tables with his arms on the table. They looked completely proportionate and human. One guy had a hoodie on with his hood up, and the other guy had a hat on. So I yell, "Hey, what's going on?" They don't say anything or move. I decided to walk over to them, and one of my friends decided to follow me, but they were about 5 to 10 feet behind me. I'm walking up to the gazebo and asking again, "Hey, what's up guys?" No response. I'm still not noticing anything weird about them other than the fact that they aren't responding. I got about 2 feet away from them, and I approached them so that I had one to my left and one to my right. I look at the guy leaning on the post and notice I can't really see the details of where his clothes ended or if he had a mouth or eyes. This guy is about 4 feet away from me, and the guy sitting down is about a foot away from me. I look down at him and see his skin. His clothes were the same. As in, they were like this fuzzy, almost pixelated black. He had a perfectly human-shaped face but no eyes. No nose holes. No mouth. At that moment, I just freeze, and it takes all my strength to get my body to start stepping back from them. I can't speak, and there is no way I can turn around. It felt like my energy was being drained out of me. This whole time, which was probably mere seconds but felt like a long time, they didn't move an inch or speak. I finally stepped back far enough, and me and my friend that followed me ran down the path, and our other friends followed. It definitely was an I should not be here vibe from them and very bad energy coming from them. My other friend saw them pretty close and felt the same way I did. One night, years ago, I was hanging out with my now ex-boyfriend. It was either November or December of 2019. We decided that night that we wanted to look at the stars. It was very cold out and probably around 1 a.m., but that didn't ever stop us from going outside. We put on extra layers, grabbed a blanket, and laid out to look at the stars. Most of the night, we were having fun, laughing, and taking. There was one point where our conversation got very serious. He started explaining to me that he didn't believe in God. Or anything at all. He believes nothing will happen when we die. My response to that was that I respect his beliefs, but I believe in God. I know something will happen when we die. I've witnessed too many spiritual things in my life not to believe. I've always known that something more is out there. His only response was that once he sees something, he'll believe it. We were quiet for a while after that, but eventually we continued talking about other things and having fun. That's when I saw something in the sky. What I saw was a massive pair of wings gliding directly above me. It was at least 18 to 20 feet. I couldn't make out a head, legs, or tail. Just a massive pair of wings. It was dark and hard to see, but the wings had a subtle glow, just enough for me to see them. It almost looked see-through, but it was also glowing. It can't be for sure, though. It was a shocking thing to see. I wasn't necessarily horrified, but I was in complete awe. I didn't feel anything negative. My ex wasn't paying attention at first. I shouted at him to look up. When he did, he immediately started panicking. He was swearing and freaking out. The pair of wings weren't there for long. It just flew above us, then above my house, and seemed to disappear or just fade into the darkness. As it was flying, it only flapped its wings once. So really, it was gliding. My ex had grabbed me and insisted we go inside. He was horrified. We didn't get much sleep that night. Eventually, the next day, after calming down, we decided we wanted to go out at night again and see if anything else happened. There was a lot more that happened, which I won't get into too much detail about. We saw strange UFOs and 2 big, bright lights that appeared to be close to us. It was so bright that it was hard to see. That in itself was very scary and unusual. But the strangest thing was the winged being or thing. After this happened, my perspective on life changed completely. There is so much out there that we don't know about. I have searched and talked to so many people to see if maybe they experienced something similar, but I can't find much information. I do believe that maybe what I saw was an angel. Or it could be an interdenominational being. I'm not sure. I don't think I'll ever know for sure. I've accepted that. When I was younger, we'd regularly have my 2 older cousins come over to stay. This particular night, we decided to camp in the garden, which is quite large and also backs onto ancient woods. The tent was a big family-sized tent that had 3 separate sleeping compartments. We all had a compartment for ourselves. We'd all gone to bed, but I remember waking up in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. One of the security lights in the garden had turned on. It only turns on when motion is detected, consequently waking me up. Since it woke me up, I decided to grab a drink that was in the side pocket of my tent. As I looked towards the side of the tent, that faced outside, I saw what could only be described as a foot-tall humanoid black silhouette standing directly outside the tent, looking in on me. It was almost as if it were observing me, and its presence felt negative. It was standing upright, much like a person would, and had the proportions of a person relative to its size. Since it was a silhouette, I can't really give any details of its characteristics. That's all I could make out. I was only young, and all I remember from that point is being frozen in fear and not being able to move. To this day, I've never been more terrified. Eventually, after 30 seconds, I mustered the courage to run into one of my cousin's sleeping compartments, and that's all I really remember. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Now I can honestly say I've tried to think rationally about what it could have been. I had no younger siblings at the time, and there was nobody small enough in my household to look even remotely close to that. I live in the UK, and there aren't really any animals that realistically could have been, especially in my area. I'd like to add that it was standing by itself and not actually leaning onto the tent. My cousins were definitely both still in the tent at the time. Ruling out it being one of them going to the toilet or something, they were probably around 15 at the time, so definitely wouldn't have been that size anyway. I had no pets at the time. Now I will add that I know that the woods that my garden backs onto are particularly old and supposedly haunted, not that I knew that at the time. I was around 14 at the time, and I always had a tendency to sleep on the couch in the living room because I didn't like sharing a bed with my older brother. This is one of 2 strange encounters in that living room. One particular night, as usual, it was around 10 p.m., and I went to the living room couch. Everyone else was still awake in their rooms, and I could see the hallway light on, but the living room was dark but not completely. So I got comfortable with the covers on, and the couch was positioned in such a way that the back of the couch faces the hallway. In other words, I cannot reach the hallway from the couch unless I jump over it or walk around it. So I'm lying down, and as soon as I close my eyes, it's like I blinked, I hear something crawling on the shaggy carpet, like it was crawling fast in circles. I could hear it loud and clear. I stay frozen, thinking, what the duck? The crawling sounded as if it were scraping itself against the carpet while moving. I hear it coming closer to me, next to the couch, and it goes back off to the same spot where the sound started, which was like 5 feet away from the couch in this empty space in the corner of the living room. Curious, I took a small peek, and as I can remember, it looked like a human crawling on all fours, except the body was backwards, like if you lie down facing up and then arch your body up with your hands and legs, and it was dark pale skin, and I didn't see a head, only its legs and hands. It wasn't wearing anything, it was dark from my view, so I couldn't see its entire body. I put my head back under the covers and immediately yelled my brother's name very loudly. Tono, come here now. Now come here. As soon as I finished yelling, the noise stopped. My heart was beating so fast, and I was sweating from being so frightened. My brother came walking like nothing and turned on the living room light. I immediately jumped over the couch and stood up to see the normal living room. Everything was the same. There were no creatures, no holes around for it to be an animal, and we had no pets. Needless to say, I slept in my room that night. I didn't go back to the couch until about a week later. About 3 months ago, I moved onto an 11-acre property in rural Texas, specifically between Yorktown and Smiley. The entire plot of land was about 3 to 4 times the size of the lot we purchased, but nobody had purchased any of the other portions while we were there. I have never been a believer in the paranormal. I still don't believe in things like ghosts or demons. I mean, if I see it, I'll believe it person. After this experience, though, I'm definitely more open to these types of things. What I saw I just call the creature. When I moved onto the property, there were weird anomalies in the technology that started to happen. Phones would glitch out and stop working, the cameras would act strange, and parked cars that were turned off would suddenly chime and the lights would turn on. I thought it was odd, but I never connected it to the property until my girlfriend mentioned the strange happenings later on after my sighting. One night, soon after I moved there, I had to get something out of my car. I took my phone light and walked out, opened the car door, and started digging around in the glove box with my full focus on finding what I was looking for. I forgot exactly what it was that I was searching for. After looking for a little while and not finding it, I closed the door and shone my light back towards the house. There was a truck parked between me and the door to the house. As I shone my light towards the truck, I became instantly terrified. What I saw was a tall, 7 to 8 feet, humanoid creature with white, sort of sickly looking skin. Its arms and legs looked longer than a human's. As I shone my light in that direction, it ran off. It had the capability to leap over the truck, landing in the bed momentarily before hopping over the other edge and disappearing beyond my sight. I distinctly remember how the truck shook when it nimbly jumped over it. The time it took to do that was about 4 to 5 seconds. I never got to see its face, and I'm glad I didn't, as I would probably be even more traumatized than I already am. I can only imagine what its face looked like. Would it have reflective eyes, like an animal? I still wonder in fear. Instead of stepping in the car and locking the door, I quickly walked around the truck and into the house, like an idiot. I was so terrified that when I stepped around the truck, it would be there waiting for me. Luckily, it wasn't. For the rest of the night, I was absolutely horrified, as well as for the rest of the time that I lived there, which was only about a month. I would have thought, okay, maybe I just imagined it, but it was so clear to me. Even the fact that the truck shook was a detail that was too realistic to be my imagination. And I have one more thing, I wasn't the only one who saw it. My girlfriend saw it out the window at one point, though not as clearly as I had seen it. She did some digging, and other people have seen a similar creature in the area. That makes it clear to me that what I saw was real. I still doubt it to some degree, because how could it be real? But I can't see any other way to explain it. I still wonder what would have happened to me if I hadn't turned around when I did. It seemed like it might have been stalking me or something. I can only imagine, in terror, what it might have done to me if I hadn't turned around and seen it. I'm honestly traumatized by this experience, as silly as that may seem. I feel embarrassed saying that, but it's true. I knew sightings like this before I experienced them myself would just make me think, these people are crazy or they're making it up for attention or fame and are faking. But now I'm more open-minded to other people's experiences. I don't want to be famous. I just want someone to know what I experienced that night. I want to know what it is that I might have seen. This story takes place when I was around 16. After this, I saw a few other demonic entities, I believe. When I was younger, I was exploring my religious views and had come to follow a form of paganism for a while. This sighting happened in the middle of the night. I found the creature when I saw it crouched on the floor beside my bed. It jumped onto the ceiling, snarled at me, and was hissing like some sort of wild animal. I turned on the light, and it appeared to pass through the wall. Afterward, I was shaken, but I calmed down and went to sleep. I have repeated nightmares of the creatures I face, which wake me up for nights after. Finally, it comes to a dream of a woman whose skin was pale, her eyes vibrant red, and her lips were also dark red. The eyes became noticeable when she opened them, came out of a coffin, and started walking towards me. Also, her hair was long, black, and extremely well groomed. She had a long, flowing white dress too, like a medieval-style dress. I turned to walk away from her, and she appears in front of me, smiles, exposing fangs, and bites into my neck. I woke up, and my neck was hurting like hell. Also, there were scratches on my stomach, and I was bleeding. That freaked me out, but my dad just told me I had somehow hurt myself in my sleep. The next night, it got more freaky, as I started seeing shadows and hearing the disembodied voice of a woman. I slept and woke up to the creature before it attacked me, and I ended up punching it in the head. It snarls at me, and I turn the light on, and the light goes off. Sparks shot out of the light. I encounter the being once again, but end up using religious measures to attempt to exorcise it. I came into my room, and the creature started snarling again. I used the Bible to exorcise it and held a crucifix, and the creature disappeared into a wisp of smoke. It's worth mentioning that some people in my family see angels and things of the sort and know when things will happen before they do. My aunt has premonitions. I have the same thing to some degree and other unexplained things sometimes. I consider myself skeptical, as I tend to question even my own faith in God, biblical stories, and everything. I am of sound mind, and I was then too. What spooked me was the vividness, if it was just a dream, and how I woke up. I had a first-hand encounter with a humanoid being. As far as I can tell, nothing happened to us. We were not abducted or harmed in any way. But we were very startled, and I would almost say I startled the creature as much as it did us. It was nighttime, and I was at my boyfriend's apartment. Hanging out in the bedroom, laying on the bed, chatting, watching TV. His roommates were out of town. After a while, I hopped off the bed to use the bathroom. I was just being silly and dramatic for no reason, and I swung the bedroom door open all the way very quickly. All the lights in the apartment were off at the time, except for the bedroom. As I started to take a step out, my body froze as I felt a presence. I took a second or so for my eyes to adjust and see that maybe 5 feet or so in front of me stood a humanoid figure with its arms in the air, sort of crouched at the knees, staring back at me. Like how people put their hands up when they are startled. Its eyes were huge black saucers, and its head was almost frog-shaped with a small mouth gaped open. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at, and once I did, I said, "Oh, shit." The second the words left my mouth, the figure shook its arms side to side very fast and accelerated into a blur that went sideways, phasing through the wall, and disappeared. I immediately closed the door as fast as I could and stood there for a moment to calm down and catch my breath. I was trying to rationalize, thinking I had just hallucinated the whole thing because I stood up too quickly. My boyfriend kept asking me what just happened, and I just kept saying I stood up too quickly, was fine, and tried to drop the subject. After a second, I felt calm enough, and I went to use the bathroom because it was basically an emergency at that point, so I ran off and came back after I was done. My boyfriend was still very shaken up when I returned from the bathroom and was holding his phone, trying to record the hallway as I walked into the doorway, asking me again what just happened. At this point, I knew we both saw something, because why would he be trying to record the hallway? So I asked him to describe to me what he thought happened before I explained my side. And sure enough, he essentially saw this humanoid figure standing in the hall with a similar description and zip out of sight, just like I had seen. After the incident, I thought what I encountered was some type of ghost or demon. I had nightmares about it because I was so shaken. Having another witness really made the reality of the situation set in. After a lot of reflection, therapy, and lurking in this community, I have started to believe it was possibly an ET of some sort or interdimensional being. About 5 to 6 years ago, I used to live in a really small apartment downtown. My place was on the bottom floor, halfway underground, on the rear corner of the building, and adjacent to the driveway that led to the building's parking lot and dumpster in the back. I got back home late one night, between 12 and 1 a.m. My dogs had been alone for hours, so I took them on a short walk. It was a weeknight, so everything was dead quiet, and no one was outside. As we were returning home, one of my dogs started acting weird. Not scared or particularly excited, but just completely fixated, like she'd picked up a scent or something and wanted to check it out. She started pulling the leash, which she never did. As we got closer to my building, she frantically pulled me and my other dog towards the driveway. We always went up the driveway after walks to dispose of their waste bags and enter the rear of the building where my apartment was, so I thought maybe she just wanted to get home for water or something. As soon as we got towards the driveway, she got in front of me to protect me and completely froze and stared. She was only about 40 pounds, but she was a half-guard dog, and something made her alert and serious. I took her cue, looked down the driveway, and saw something even blacker than the surrounding darkness. At first, I thought I saw a small black dog or a raccoon, as some of my other neighbors had small dogs, and we would occasionally get raccoons in our dumpster. After a few seconds, I realized it wasn't either of those things. The thing made eye contact with me and started to walk towards us. As soon as it got next to the building, I realized how big it was, as it literally stood right next to my apartment and window. This thing was easily 4 feet off the ground, on all fours, and it kind of looked like something between a wolf and a bear. It was completely black, but it looked like the black was distorted or out of place, almost like how a black hole is portrayed when it is absorbing light around it. It had a few gray squiggles in the black that moved erratically, and its eyes glowed gray with a small hint of red. It looked almost like someone animated it, completely out of place in reality. When it got to the corner of the building, it stopped and stared at me, and my dog completely lost its shit. I'd seen that dog bark to protect me, bark at other dogs and cats, and bark at wild animals, but this was the only time I'd ever seen her bark like that. She was howling, barking, and almost yodeling simultaneously, and she was completely freaked out. My second dog was quiet and looked almost confused at first, just staring down the driveway. After a few seconds, it was like he finally noticed what my other dog did, and he started doing the same thing, except he sounded a lot more afraid. This next part still freaks me out when I think about it. I was frozen in shock, but the thing opened its mouth and showed some teeth with more distortion and gray squiggles coming into and out of its mouth. Its eyes glowed more than before, gray and red, almost like smoke. It let out a penetrating sound like a guttural growl, and my entire body felt it like it went through me. I strangely felt like I was connected to it somehow, and that really scared me. It stared like it was looking through me for a little while longer, I'm not sure how long, and then it walked away from the driveway towards the back of the building and disappeared. I stood there dumbfounded for a couple of minutes, wondering what the hell just happened and contemplating whether or not to go inside. The building was locked on both sides, but all of this took place literally right next to the window to my bedroom. After a few more minutes, it started to feel like it didn't even happen. Still, there was no way in hell. I was walking down that driveway, so I went in through the front of the building, threw the dog's waste bags out in the laundry room, went into my apartment, locked the door, checked my gun next to my bed, and invited both my dogs to sleep on the bed with me. I couldn't sleep for hours, but my dog, who tried to protect me, passed out almost immediately. Her little heart was beating through her chest, and that was the only time I've ever seen her that afraid. I lived there for 9 years, and nothing like that has ever happened before or since. I, 41 female, have had a sleep condition called REM sleep behavior disorder that causes me to occasionally continue dreaming after part of my brain has woken up. So I can look around my room and see things that are not there. This is common enough for me that after the initial panic wears off, I get over it. Until the night, my partner at the time saw it too. I woke up in my bed, flat on my back. Above me was a solid black humanoid creature with smooth features and long, thin limbs. Its mouth was open, very close to mine. I felt like it was studying me. My heart was racing, as it always is when I have these sleep disturbances. I jolted in fear, and the thing vanished. I took some big, deep breaths and thought to myself how ducked up that episode was. It felt so real. I felt its curiosity in its expression. And it was so close to my face. My dreams are usually vivid, but this was unreal. I felt my heart, which was beating like crazy, and took another breath to help slow it down. Then my partner, in bed beside me, said, "Did you see that too?" I hadn't yet said anything out loud at that point except for gasping for air. So I asked him what he saw. He said he saw a black creature leaning over me. He saw it skittle down to the foot of the bed and over the edge. He said it was a shadow person. I had never heard of them. I was freaking out at this point and turned on all the lights. I made him go look under the bed, and nothing was there. He was into supernatural stuff. I never was, and other than this event, I still am not. I like science. I like things I can measure. This experience, him seeing something that I rationalized in my mind as a dream gone bad, did not line up. I did not sleep that night. Everything just buzzed with creepy energy, and I was not having it. Where did the thing go? Where the hell did it come from? What was it doing on my bed? Why was it looking so intensely at me? I have a son. At the time, he was about 14. I didn't tell him what I saw for obvious reasons. When he was 2, he had a fever that induced a seizure. It was a terrible experience for me more than for him. He was back to normal within a few hours, and I was traumatized for years. But any time that he got a fever after that, he tended to become disoriented and easily confused. So he developed a fever in the night. I don't even remember where it was from. And I didn't know about it until the morning. He tells me, shaken, that he had a horrible night sleeping. He felt something in his room all night. He told me he saw a creature, a little black guy, in his room. Every time he opened his eyes, it would back off, but when he closed them, it would come closer. He said it happened all night. It is important to note that I am not into supernatural things. I do not believe in it. I lean into science. But when my son told me this story, I leaned into whatever I could do to clear our space of this unwanted guest. A friend recommended I contact an elder from a local First Nations community and ask if she could help us. She came and did a ceremonial cleansing and blessing of our home and family, and she asked the ancient spirits to protect us and keep us safe. We didn't see the shadow person again. I cannot explain what happened. The elder said that there was a portal open near the center of our home, and she politely asked the being to leave. And I guess it did. We eventually moved out, and I do not miss that house. This happened just last night. I am 25 years old and have not once in my life actually seen a being that I thought might not be human until last night. I was at my friend's house, in the barn on his property that is used as a sort of car garage. My friends were having a few beers, but I was not because I had to drive home. I was drinking water. I stepped outside the barn to pee around 11:45 p.m. As I did my business. I looked around in the dark when my eyes caught what appeared at first to be a tall humanoid figure standing near the back edge of my friend's neighbor's house. It was so late and it was standing absolutely still that I assumed I must be seeing some tall, inanimate object, perhaps a porch umbrella that was closed. The top of it looked, even in the barely present light, to be flesh-colored, while the rest of it all the way down was black, with perhaps some trace of silverish color near the legs. I kept my eye on it out of some basic instinct, even while my mind told me it was nothing to worry about. I had all but dismissed it and was turning around to go back inside when I saw it back in the full darkness behind the neighbor's house. It went from faint illumination to darkness in the same transitional way that would happen if it indeed had stepped backward into the absolute black. My eyes had been focused on the head area, which is how I noticed it happening at all. It was hard to tell, but I could swear I could still see it standing in the shadows, some faint trace of light betraying its presence. I told my friends and got a weird look. My buddy asked me to lock the door behind me, which I did, but not before I grabbed a ball-peen hammer and walked outside. I said calmly but loudly out into the darkness, "You don't creep and snoop on people. You show me your face or fudge off." Only I didn't say fudge. At about 1:30 last night, I was home, and I let my dog out. I heard what sounded like a single footstep from the road at the edge of my driveway in the pitch black. Because of what I had witnessed not even 2 hours prior, I decided to say confidently, "You better think twice before rolling up on me, friend. I come prepared." At this point, I pulled from my shirt the Visvavahara pendant I always wear, held it for a few seconds, and told the darkness how it meant I was indestructible and unstoppable, then let my dog in with a smirk. I don't know if the incidents are related, and the second one was almost definitely an overactive imagination on my part, but I know I absolutely saw something. It was there and is necessarily either human or not, and both possibilities are pretty unnerving. All I know is that, whatever it is, I am not going to take any crap from some stalker. My dad is a massive nerd and alien enthusiast and would always talk to me about the probability of the existence of other intelligent life. As a child, I was equally fascinated but never really scared, and I always wondered about my own chances of maybe meeting an alien. At the time of my encounter, I was 7 or 8 years old and had never really known about abductions or aliens being scary. To me, they were just something neat. Because of how my house is situated, I always figured that it would be difficult for any visitors to find good parking because the terrain was very steep with dense pine forests. I live in a small town in Colorado, and my house is in a valley and on top of a hill, closely wedged into the side of the mountain. So there is never anyone around other than my own family. When this all happened, I still shared a room with my sister, who was a notoriously heavy sleeper, known to sleep through fire alarms and thunderstorms. Meanwhile, I was a very light sleeper, and I still am. At some point, I suddenly began feeling extremely scared. This feeling of fear and dread became a regular occurrence, happening once or twice a week. I was never a kid who worried about monsters under the bed or in the closet, so it was weird that I suddenly started feeling like there was something else in the room. At night, I would hear the door handle turn, followed by strange chirping sounds that would stop as soon as I moved. The sounds scared me, and I began sleeping completely under the covers, making sure none of me was exposed to the outside world. Soon after I began sleeping like this, I would feel something tapping the covers. Oftentimes, the tapping and chirping happened together, and I always stopped if I moved around. Now, anyone could chalk this up to the imagination of a 7-year-old, that's what my parents thought, and honestly, sometimes I wonder if that's really all it was, but then I think about one particular night that makes me nearly certain that there was something other than my sister in my room. One night, my parents went out for dinner and hired a babysitter. It was a very normal night, and the sitter was super nice. She read us a bedtime story and actually ended up falling asleep herself. She was on my sister's bed, which was in the middle of the room, and my bed was up against the wall that had the door go into the room. Because the babysitter was there, I felt safer, safe enough to sleep with my head above the covers. I was still a little scared, struggled to fall asleep, and ended up staring at the wall for a while. It was at this time that I felt sudden fear and impending doom. The door handle turned, making little sounds as the door was slowly pushed open. I was paralyzed with fear, too afraid to move and hide under the covers because I thought the sudden movement might put me in danger. A tall white thing slinked into the room. It was around 7 feet tall and super thin. Its skin was sort of translucent and had a greenish-gray hue, an extremely muted version of the glow of those glow-in-the-dark stars that you put on bedroom ceilings. Its head wasn't a super dramatic, angular teardrop shape. It was more of a really long, slight pear shape, still rounded, super sunken in with defined bone structure and heavy shadows. Its eyes were like empty voids, with no reflection or obvious dimension. They really just seemed like large holes in its face, empty sockets. There were no visible eyelids, a small, narrow bump of a nose, and a small, undefined mouth. Its arms and torso were very thin and long, but I couldn't see its fingers from where I was. It moved very quickly and fluidly, going right to my sister's bed. It stared for a bit, maybe it was confused by the presence of the babysitter. It simply watched, moving around the bed slowly. I was horrified. I wanted to scream, run, and hide, but I was too scared. All I could do was stare as it circled my sister's bed. After a couple minutes, it left, quickly making its way back to the door, slipping out of my room, and closing the door as it left. It paid no attention to me during the entirety of the encounter, and when it was out of the room, I heard a couple chirps, quickly followed by silence. At this point, I was finally able to bury myself under the blankets, where I eventually passed out. My sister and I never got hurt, and I don't think they ever did much more than observe. I'm certain that my sister didn't even know because she was such a heavy sleeper. In hindsight, I think it was mostly interested in my sister, and I don't feel its presence in my room very often since we stopped sharing rooms. I'm not really sure what it was. I don't feel like it 100% fits the common gray description, but I feel like it's similar enough. This experience still affects me today, and while I don't suffer from any crippling fear or PTSD, I still occasionally get really scared. I still sleep completely under the covers, and I always make sure I have a flashlight with me under the covers in case of an emergency. I really don't think there was any malicious intent with the thing at all, but I'm scared anyway. I wish I could brush it off as an overactive imagination or as sleep paralysis, but I don't think that's what it was. I still occasionally hear the chirping and feel the tapping. I wonder why it visits. Sometimes I think it just likes to check up on the kid who sees it every once in a while. Maybe one day I will muster up the courage to try to confront it if it's ever around. My friend has told me this story a couple times, and it's piqued my curiosity. If anyone has any idea of what this may have been, let me know. From what I can recall, this was a couple of winters ago. A good friend of mine, we'll call him Mike, is a pretty avid hunter and spends a lot of hunting seasons in northern Wisconsin. On one particular winter day, he went out to hunt with some buddies in the woods around his cabin, which he was extremely familiar with as his family makes frequent trips up there. Anyways, he and his buddies had spent most of the day out in one area near the edge of their property, and as the sun began to set, they decided to head back. Mike wanted to stay a little while longer to see if he could get another shot or two in, so he stayed behind as the guys headed home. It had snowed a lot that week, so following the tracks back home would have been easy if it got too dark. After not much luck on his own and with night falling quickly, he decided to make the trek back as well. The walk itself was, I think he said, about 20 minutes, so he was on his own for a while. Now the path they took was near the property line of another family's land, and as far as he knew, they weren't up there hunting that weekend. Even if they had been, it was pretty dark at that point, and most people were at home by then. Anyway, about halfway through his walk home, he noticed a shape in the trees a couple yards across the property line. He described it as a dark, solid yet shadowy humanoid figure well over 6, like a huge muscular man who was built like a linebacker but without any sort of hunting gear on or noticeable weapon, as far as he could tell. He didn't think anything of it at first since he was probably just on his way back as well, so he continued on. A couple minutes later, he heard the sound of something moving through the trees a couple yards past the property line at about the same speed as him. He looked over and saw what looked to be the shadow man, walking almost parallel to him. At that point, he was a little bothered. Was this guy following him? What for? So he quickened his pace and made his way home without glancing back. The next morning, he and his buddies headed out on the same route as they had taken yesterday. It hadn't snowed, so their footprints were still visible. As they followed the prints back, Mike became curious and took a detour over the property line to where he last saw the figure walking along. He didn't find a single footprint. I know there are some legends about things in the northern Wisconsin woods, i.e., the Hodag in Rhinelander, etc., but neither I nor Mike nor any of our friends have any idea what this could have been. 1988, 3 a.m., alone except for my dog, and sound asleep. I hear 3 very loud knocks on my front door, which is right next to my bed. I woke up and bounded to the door in 3 steps. My dog was already at the door, in alert mode, and listening. I looked out the peephole in the door, expecting to see a cop. Nothing there. Then I realized that my door was inside a gated courtyard with 6-foot-high brick walls, and the gate was locked. No one could have run off without being seen or heard climbing the gate. 2005, 4 a.m., a 22-year-old son is home from college, and I am awakened by 3 loud knocks. The sound seemed to come from all directions at once. I got up and checked out of the house. Nothing. Later that morning, my son gets up and says, "Did you hear the 3 knocks last night?" I said, "Yes, it is the second time that I have heard knocks around 3 a.m. I consulted a respected psychic, and she said that it was Grandpa checking on you and that he looks like you. My mother died in 2011. In 2014, I dreamed that I saw her face against a black background, and she said, 'You are going to need a bigger patio.' I woke up and said to myself, wow, that seemed real. I went about my day thinking about the experience. 2 weeks later, my son calls me and asks if he can store some weightlifting equipment at my house. I said okay, and he said he was on his way. He arrived with 2 friends in a large flatbed truck loaded with equipment. They unloaded the equipment onto my back patio, completely covering it. I watched as they filled the last remaining space on the patio, and I remembered the dream and instantly understood its meaning. My mom just let me know that she still exists. Age 10, it's summer, and I am home alone around 6 p.m. watching TV. A stack of books on a shelf above my bed shot off the shelf and landed in the middle of my bedroom. 2 a.m. I can't sleep and don't want to disturb my wife. So I go sit on the couch in the front room in the dark. The couch faces a fireplace with a TV in front of it. So, as I am sitting, I am looking at the TV. The TV is off. The screen is black. Behind me, over my right shoulder, is the doorway into the hallway, which leads to a bathroom to the left and our bedroom to the right. As I am sitting there in darkness, I noticed the movement of a reflection on the black TV screen. I focused on the movement, and it looked like the reflection of a thin woman dressed in a white flowing gown floating smoothly left and right in the dark hallway door opening. The woman was just moving in the hallway left and right towards the bathroom and then towards the bedroom. I watched this for about a half hour and would look over my right shoulder into the hallway and see nothing, but when I looked back at the TV, there was the reflection of the white apparition floating back and forth. I got bored and went back to bed. My family owned this house from 1952 to 2012. There was always a presence in the house. My mother was often visited at night by the spirit of an Indian. She said that he would just stand next to her bed and stare at her. She also visited my orbs, with faces floating around her. We knew that the area was home to Indians. My mother believed that our house was built over an Indian burial ground. My grandmother's childhood home. Going back almost a century, my grandmother was born and raised on a farm in Yugoslavia. When she was about 18, the Second World War broke out. They weren't Jewish, so she and her family, of 7, left the country. Years later, they returned to their home to find 3 dead soldiers. My grandma, who was the youngest in her family, inherited the house after her family had passed away. When I was in my 20s, 2004, I believe, my grandparents and my mother were going to see family in what used to be my grandmother's hometown. I asked to tag along, and they agreed so long as I found my own way there. They had already bought their tickets, so I bought a ticket, and a few days later I flew out, a few hours after they did. We spent a lot of time admiring the scenery. I only speak English and a bit of French, so I couldn't really communicate with the locals, so most of my time was spent wandering around sightseeing, and on the day before we left, my grandmother asked if we wanted to see her old house. Of course, we all agreed. When we arrived at the house, it seemed far more decrepit than I had expected, almost like something from a film, but inside, things were different, dusty, but in amazing condition. My grandmother went off to explore as she hadn't seen the house in decades, and my mother and grandfather followed, but I decided to explore on my own. The way the house looked made things feel almost magical when you were alone. After looking around a bit, I found a closed door. I tried to open it, but it was stuck. I forced it open and found it led to the basement. The basement was dark, dirtier, and less furnished than the rest of the house. I used a light on my keychain to see around the room. I had only been looking around for a few minutes when I felt a hand on my shoulder and someone said something to me in what I presumed to be German. It startled me, so I turned around and found that no one was there. Naturally, I got out of there quickly.